I never thought a single glance could do this much to a person. There I was, wiping grease off my hands behind the counter at the repair shop when she walked in. My girlfriend's sister, older, sharp, impossibly composed, yet somehow chaotic all at once. She had this quiet authority, the kind that makes you forget to breathe, like she owned the air itself without raising her voice. The bell above the door chimed, and I looked up, instinctively smiling. She didn't smile back, not exactly, but there was a flicker in her eyes, something that made my chest tighten. She leaned on the counter with one elbow, resting her chin on her hand, surveying the shop like she'd been here 100 times before, even though I'd only seen her twice. "Hey," she said, voice low but warm, as if she'd been holding it back just for me. I cleared my throat, suddenly aware of the smudges on my shirt, the grease under my nails. Hi." My voice came out uneven, more like a croak than a greeting. She tilted her head, and for a moment, the shop, clanking tools, humming fluorescent lights, the faint smell of oil, fell away. She studied me as if weighing whether to speak, whether to touch the air between us. And then she did something small, almost imperceptible. She brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, and I swear the world shivered. I handed her the form she needed to fill, and our fingers brushed briefly. It was nothing, objectively, but her touch lingered in a way that made my fingers tremble, a quiet insistence I wasn't ready to name. She noticed, of course. Her gaze flicked up to mine, softening just slightly before returning to the papers. "You always look this focused?" she asked casually, but her tone carried an edge, a weight that made me question if she'd just teased me or called me out. "Yeah, I guess. I guess when you're fixing things, you get used to concentrating," I said. Too many words. I leaned back, rubbing the back of my neck, suddenly aware that I was talking too much. She didn't interrupt, didn't roll her eyes. She just watched, quietly patient, like she could see me from the inside out without saying a word. Then she smiled. Or maybe it was just the corner of her lips curling, a private joke I wasn't allowed in on yet. And I noticed how the light caught the silver at her temples, how the faint perfume she wore made the air sticky and warm. I realized I'd been holding my breath for too long and let it out slowly, trying to act natural. There was a pause then, longer than necessary, filled with static electricity you can't ignore. We both knew it. She leaned slightly closer to grab her pen, and my hand twitched against the counter, almost, reaching for hers. And then she looked up, directly at me, and for one heartbeat, the room was silent except for our shared awareness. I didn't kiss her. I didn't even touch her. But I left the counter thinking about the tilt of her head, the hesitation in her smile, the way she made the mundane feel charged. I caught myself replaying it hours later, sitting on my couch, trying to pretend I hadn't noticed how my pulse had spiked. And the thought I couldn't shake, the one I whispered to myself in the dark, was this: if she wanted, she could make me do anything. And I'd probably let her. It was the weekend, and the shop was quieter than usual. Most of the other techs had taken the day off, leaving me alone with her, my girlfriend's sister, though alone, didn't feel quite right when she leaned over a desk piled with parts, examining a circuit board as if she'd done it 100 times. "I don't know why they sent me in here," she muttered, eyes scanning the tiny components with meticulous precision. "I'm better at paperwork." "You're fine," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I crouched beside her, reaching for a screwdriver she had just set down. Our hands brushed again. My pulse spiked, though I forced my fingers to move naturally. She didn't flinch, didn't pull away. Instead, her shoulders slumped ever so slightly, and for the first time I noticed the faint tension under her jaw, the way her hair fell over one eye like a shield. I realized she was tired, and maybe something else too. "You're quiet today," I said, almost regretting the words the second they left my mouth. "Just thinking," she replied, not looking at me. Her voice was softer than usual, tinged with a note of something fragile, something I wasn't supposed to notice. I watched her fingers, delicate and precise, twisting the screwdriver. The skin was pale, a few faint freckles on the back of her hand catching the light. She pulled in a breath, paused, and let it out slowly, as if she was trying to will herself through the next step. You don't have to pretend, I said gently, though I wasn't sure what she might be pretending. She glanced at me then, startled, like she hadn't realized I was paying such close attention. Her eyes darted away, and she gave a small, humorless laugh that didn't reach her mouth. I wanted to ask what was wrong, but I didn't. Instead, I offered her a spare part one had polished earlier, my fingers brushing hers lightly again. She hesitated, then took it, gripping it like it was a lifeline. Her eyes softened for the briefest moment, a flash of acknowledgement. Or maybe it was just recognition that I saw her, really saw her. We worked side by side in silence for a while. Every small motion, every sigh she tried to disguise, felt amplified, electric. I noticed how her elbow bumped the desk occasionally, how she would tighten her lips when concentrating, how the faintest line formed between her brows. And I realized I didn't want the quiet to end, not yet. When she finally straightened, stretching her arms, our hands brushed once more, lingering just a second longer than necessary. I wanted to say something, to fill the charged silence, but instead I just watched her adjust her jacket, her gaze flicking to the window. Outside, the late afternoon light softened the shop into gold and shadow, and I felt the weight of her quiet presence like a gentle pull I couldn't resist. And then, just before she turned to leave, she paused, looking back at me with something unspoken flickering in her eyes. Hesitation, maybe, or curiosity, or something heavier I couldn't name. For a heartbeat, I thought she might say something. She didn't. But the moment hung there, soft, electric, impossible to ignore. I swallowed, noticing my fingers still tingling where they'd touched hers, and knew I'd be thinking about that pause long after she was gone. The rain had started just as I was locking up the shop. Water streamed down the windows in erratic rivulets, the kind that make everything inside feel small, suspended, temporary. She'd stayed late, ostensibly to pick up a forgotten file. But I knew better. We ended up crouched by the counter, sorting through invoices and receipts under the dim fluorescent light. Her shoulder brushed mine as she leaned over to reach the stack of papers I was holding. I felt it immediately, a spark that had nothing to do with electricity and everything to do with proximity. My chest tightened, and I forced myself to focus on the numbers, on the mundane task, because anything else felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. You never talk about yourself, I said quietly, just loud enough for her to hear. She glanced at me, eyes sharp but guarded, like she had a door she only opened a crack. I don't. I mean, there's not much to tell, she said, then paused, caught herself, and shook her head. Never mind. Something about the hesitation made my stomach knot. I wanted to press, to lean closer, to reach across the counter, and something. But I didn't. I just let my fingers hover near hers for a second too long before picking up the pen she dropped. Her laugh came then, soft, fragile, and it made me flinch in the best way. It wasn't the laugh you hear from friends or family, but the one that feels like it belongs only to someone who trusts you enough to let you in, even a little. She looked tired, and yet there was a kind of rigid grace in the way she straightened, smoothing the fabric of her jacket over her arms. Then her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, a subtle change in expression flashing across her face. Surprise, irritation, something I couldn't read. She shook her head, silenced it, and muttered, "Not now," before tucking it away. External pressure had intruded, just enough to remind me that some lines weren't meant to be crossed. I watched her for a moment, noting the small details, the way her hands moved, almost brushing the papers she held, the slight crease in her brow, the faint scent of her perfume that lingered longer than it should. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words lodged in my throat. We were quiet then, the storm outside a backdrop for the tension that had built between us like a coiled spring. I caught her gaze, lingering longer than polite conversation required, and I thought I saw the same hesitation mirrored there. The almost, the maybe, the could be. My heart beat too fast. My hands itched to reach out, and for a second I imagined tipping closer, just enough to close the space, to let the air between us carry what we weren't saying. And then, a sound from the street. A car splashing through a puddle broke the spell. She straightened, stepping back, and I forced myself to step back too, pretending I hadn't been inches from a confession I wasn't ready to voice. I left the shop that night with the taste of almost on my tongue, the weight of what didn't happen pressing against my chest. And I knew, as I walked through the rain, that the memory of her glance, that fleeting, almost electric moment, would follow me far longer than the storm itself. The shop was nearly empty, just the two of us lingering amid scattered tools and the hum of the fluorescent lights. I was wiping down a counter when she appeared in the doorway, hands shoved into her coat pockets, eyes dark with something I couldn't name. "Do you ever think about why this keeps happening?" she asked, voice low, almost hesitant. I froze mid-wipe, unsure what this meant. I looked at her, really looked, and for the first time I saw the weight she carried, the tiny, almost imperceptible slump of her shoulders, the line between her brows that never fully softened. What do you mean?" I said, careful. My voice sounded too loud in the quiet. She stepped closer, slow, deliberate, until we were almost within reach. Almost. I mean us. You, me. Why we can't not notice each other. Why it feels like the world is pressing us together even when it shouldn't. I swallowed, feeling the coil of tension tighten in my chest. I wanted to say something, anything, but my words dissolved before they reached my mouth. I just watched her, tracing the curve of her jaw, the way her eyes flicked down and back up, unsure, calculating, maybe afraid. I don't know what we're doing," she continued, softer now, almost whispering. "But I feel it. Don't you?" I nodded, though barely. Every nerve in my body screamed, and yet I stayed still, because this wasn't about desire. It was about recognition. About acknowledging that what had been unsaid between us for weeks wasn't normal. She let out a short, bitter laugh. "We can't pretend anymore. Not after tonight. Not after." Her voice caught, and she trailed off. "After what?" I asked, my own voice trembling despite my effort to stay calm. She shook her head, eyes glistening with something I wanted to reach for but dared not touch. "After everything. You notice me. I notice you. And I hate that it matters so much." We stood there, the silence stretching, thick with unspoken truths. I could feel her breathing, uneven, and I realized she was holding herself back from saying the one thing she wanted to. Or maybe the one thing she feared saying. She started, then stopped, swallowed, then whispered the words she couldn't quite get out. "I don't want to ruin anything, but I can't keep pretending either." I wanted to close the distance between us, to say she didn't have to, that I felt the same, that I'd felt it since the moment she first walked into the shop. But I stayed rooted, because some confessions weren't about comfort, they were about truth. Her gaze lingered on me for a long beat, searching, vulnerable, raw. And then, almost too quietly to hear, she said, "I don't know if I can keep doing this, just existing next to you without it meaning something." Her words hung in the air like smoke, and I realized I couldn't think, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything except meet her eyes and feel the devastating weight of the moment. And then she turned, shoulders stiff, and left the shop, leaving me staring at the door, at the silence, at the emptiness she carried out with her, and I knew I'd never forget the ache of that vulnerable, unguarded line. I found her at the back of the shop, crouched by a shelf of old manuals and receipts, flipping through a tattered notebook. Her brow was furrowed, and she looked smaller somehow, like the weight of the world had pressed down on her shoulders. "You always carry things with you, don't you?" I asked softly, trying not to startle her. She looked up, startled, and for a moment her usual composure faltered. Her eyes flickered to mine, then down at the notebook in her hands. "Some things you don't just let go of," she said, voice quiet, almost fragile. I hesitated. I wanted to ask, but I didn't. Instead, I watched her flip the pages with careful precision, as if handling fragile glass. Finally, she paused on a page, tracing a line of faded handwriting with her finger. "It's him," she murmured. I thought I was over it, I really did. But sometimes, when I least expect it, it comes back. The weight, the silence. She shook her head and looked up at me, eyes glimmering. I didn't mean to. I stepped closer, hesitant, unsure if my presence would comfort her or make her retreat. "You're not alone in that," I said. I've lost people too. People who leave marks you can't erase. Her gaze lingered on me, studying, searching. For a moment, it felt like she was weighing whether to let me in, whether I could carry the quiet ache she kept tucked away. Then, almost reluctantly, she showed me the page she had paused on. A sketch of a man's face, careful but incomplete, with a few words scribbled beneath. I miss you even when I don't want to. I swallowed. He was important to you. She nodded, a single, slow motion, and her voice cracked slightly. I thought I could leave it behind. But memories, they don't always let you. I reached out, not touching, just near enough to let her know she didn't have to shoulder it alone. She didn't move away. She just let the tension settle between us, thick and fragile, like the calm after a storm. Then she laughed, softly, bitterly, shaking her head. I'm ridiculous, aren't I? Sitting here with a stranger, showing you all this. You're not ridiculous, I said, almost automatically. You're human. That's all. She tilted her head, looking at me in a way that made my chest tighten. Not desire, not yet, but something equally destabilizing. Maybe, she whispered. Maybe I just needed someone to see that part of me, even if it's complicated. The notebook closed slowly in her hands. She tucked it under her arm, glanced at me with a fleeting, unguarded smile, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I'd glimpsed her entirely. Her strength, her grief, her quiet scars. And then, almost imperceptibly, she reached for the door handle, paused, and looked back at me one last time, her eyes heavy with things unsaid. The air between us was charged, subtle but seismic, like the world had shifted just enough to let something new sneak in without warning. I stood there, staring at the door, feeling the echo of that moment, knowing it would linger long after the notebook, and her confession, had disappeared from sight. The shop smelled of oil and rain, a faint trace of her perfume lingering in the corner where she'd been standing. We were alone again, sorting through returned parts, but it felt different this time. The air between us wasn't just charged, it was familiar, settled into a quiet rhythm neither of us tried to break. You know, she said softly, sliding a small box across the counter. We've been doing this, avoiding, pretending, whatever it's been, for too long. I nodded, my fingers brushing hers as I picked it up. The contact was brief, almost incidental, yet it carried the weight of everything unsaid. Her hand lingered a fraction longer than necessary, and I didn't pull away. I can't not notice you, she said, voice low, almost a whisper. And I don't want to. I met her eyes and saw it there. Acknowledgement, honesty, and a quiet surrender neither of us had voiced before. I didn't answer with words. Words would have cheapened it. Instead, I stepped a little closer, careful, giving her the space to decide how close was too close. She shifted slightly, brushing a stray hair behind her ear, and for the first time I noticed how natural she looked letting herself be seen, how soft her defenses had become without losing strength. I guess we're just here now, I said finally. No promises, no plans. Just now. Her lips twitched in a faint, unguarded smile. Just now, she echoed. We moved to sit on the worn leather stool by the window, the rain outside drumming a quiet rhythm against the glass. Silence stretched, but it wasn't empty. It was full of shared history, whispered confessions, and a sense of inevitability. I reached out, almost without thinking, and she didn't flinch. Our fingers intertwined naturally, a gentle acknowledgement rather than a leap of passion, just enough to seal the moment, to confirm that the connection we'd tried to deny for weeks was no longer avoidable. We leaned back, shoulders brushing lightly, foreheads nearly touching in that fragile, intimate way that doesn't need a name. I could feel her breath, her subtle shifts, the quiet pulse of her presence against mine. And it struck me how profoundly simple this was. How two people could reach an understanding that didn't demand words, declarations, or labels. The storm outside began to taper, the rain thinning to a whisper. Inside, the world felt smaller, contained, intimate. I let myself exhale fully, letting the tension, the longing, the near misses settle into something soft but undeniable. She squeezed my hand lightly, and I squeezed back. Not in urgency, not in triumph, just a quiet affirmation. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The space between us, the shared silence, said everything. And then she rested her head briefly against my shoulder, just for a heartbeat, and pulled back, eyes meeting mine. That small, fleeting touch, so ordinary, so human, was enough. I watched her for a long moment, letting the quiet finality sink in. No grand declarations. No fireworks. Just the recognition that what had begun with hesitation, awkwardness, and almost moments had arrived here. Inevitable, earned, and entirely real. We stayed there, in the hum of the shop and the fading rain, letting the world exist around us while we existed together. And for once, that was enough. It's been months since that night in the shop, since the rain and the quiet, and sometimes I still catch myself smiling at the memory of her hand brushing mine, just enough to confirm that we'd arrived somewhere we couldn't have predicted. I think about how much has changed, not just in us, but in how I notice the world now. I notice small things, the way someone hesitates before speaking, the weight behind a glance, the language of silence. And I notice her differently too, how her laughter has softened, how she moves through a room with less caution, how her eyes carry warmth that wasn't there before. We don't label it. We never did. And that's what makes it real. It's not about perfect timing or romanticized gestures or dramatic declarations. It's about presence, shared spaces, moments so subtle they could be overlooked if you weren't paying attention. I've learned that love doesn't always need words. Sometimes it's the gentle squeeze of fingers, the way a look lingers a second too long, the quiet acknowledgement that someone finally sees you for all that you are. She's changed me, made me slower to judge, quicker to notice, more willing to let things exist without forcing them into neat compartments. And she's changed too, I think. Not in dramatic, obvious ways, but in the quiet courage it takes to let someone in, to let herself feel without armor, even when it's terrifying. Sometimes we sit together in the shop, the hum of fluorescent lights above us, the world outside moving too fast, and just exist. Not talking, not performing, just being. And in those moments, I understand something I couldn't before. Love isn't about fireworks or confessions. It's about the steady presence that slowly makes life feel lighter, warmer, human. I still remember the awkward glances, the almost confessions, the hesitation, the silence, and I'm grateful for every single one. They were all necessary, the fragile threads that led us here. And I carry them with me, tucked quietly in my chest, a reminder that connection, even slow and hesitant, is worth the patience. So if this story made you feel something, made you pause, smile, ache, or remember a quiet moment that meant everything, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?